So what are we really saying here? Are we actually admitting that doctors and nurses are paid too much in the United States of America? Boy, that's a sobering chart. The other peculiar, misleading half-truth or outright lie that Bernie Sanders has been trading in is this notion that Medicare for All would save taxpayers a lot of money, would save the United States government a lot of money. And what is the one crucial variable presumed in that calculus? Pay attention here, it's mentioned very briefly. The crucial assumption is that they would reduce the wages paid to doctors and nurses by 40%. Usual disclaimer at the start of this video, the fact that I criticize the left wing does not mean that I myself am something other than left wing. Within American politics, I'd be considered quite far to the left. Nevertheless, I made the decision a very long time ago that I don't want to be a part of a religion that's built on a lie. When there are lies and inaccuracies on the left, whether it's the moderate left or the far left, what have you, I am honest with myself and I'm honest with others about the lies, inaccuracies, and errors that are to be found on my side of the political spectrum. I would advise you and everyone else to do the same. You may have heard this many, many times in the last 2 years, the claim that the United States of America spends twice as much on healthcare as other countries around the world. So here, quoting a New York Times article, Senator Bernie Sanders and other Democratic candidates for the 2020 elections often note that the United States spends twice as much on healthcare as other comparable nations, but gets less value in return. Mr. Sanders has long railed against the healthcare industry, arguing that it has gotten rich at the expense of regular Americans. When we're looking at politics and propaganda, carefully crafted messages of this kind, it's important to emphasize that the word there is it. He doesn't say medical doctors. He doesn't say the nurses union. He says it. Okay? If he blamed unionized nurses, that would sound right-wing. That would sound conservative. The statement, it would be the same statement. If he blamed your local family medical doctor, well, that might create all kinds of conflict. The general public wants to imagine that the friendly doctor and the friendly nurse, that they aren't the bad, evil people who are getting rich off the system. It's just it. It's a depersonalized, abstract system that he's blaming, not particular people. We continue here. Mr. Sanders likes to cite the healthcare industry, along with companies like Amazon and Walmart, as a prime example of the corporate greed his campaign is fighting head on, right? Corporate greed, not medical doctors' greed, right? Not nurses' greed, not unionized hospital workers' greed. This whole business of blaming corporate greed is also a bit peculiar. Do you think that in France they have no corporate greed? Do you think that in England they have no corporate greed? Looking at these numbers, we see something really important that differentiates France from the United States, differentiates England from the United States. It really does seem a bit surreal to try to attribute this to some kind of abstract notion like corporate greed or some conspiratorial idea of what's going on behind the scenes. It's not behind the scenes, people. It's right out here in front of you. It's on the surface. People aren't seeing it because they're actively choosing to ignore it. They want to maintain this myth of the friendly family doctor, that doctors and nurses have your best interests at heart, when they don't. They have their own best interests at heart. It's the greed of doctors, it's the greed of nurses, it's the greed of very real people with faces inside the system. It's not some kind of abstract conspiratorial notion of the system that exists apart from those individual people. So what are we really saying here? Are we actually admitting that doctors and nurses are paid too much in the United States of America? Boy, that's a sobering chart. When you make this claim again and again, Bernie Sanders and Alexandra Occasio-Cortez, and so on. We make this claim again and again that healthcare costs twice as much in the United States of America as it does in France. You might put up this chart showing how much or how little the United States of America pays medical doctors compared to France. It's more than double. You're paying a huge amount in salaries to doctors and nurses. This is primary care physicians. The numbers become even more startling when you look at specialists. Whoa, that's a lot of money. That's a huge gap. The other peculiar, misleading half-truth or outright lie that Bernie Sanders has been trading in is this notion that Medicare for All would save taxpayers a lot of money, would save the United States government a lot of money. And what is the one crucial variable presumed in that calculus? Pay attention here, it's mentioned very briefly. The crucial assumption is that they would reduce the wages paid to doctors and nurses by 40%.
We asked Senator Sanders' spokesperson. He told us that while the study says Medicare for All would increase the federal budget by roughly $32 trillion, it also says that the projected cost of all healthcare expenditures in the U.S. would drop by $2 trillion. The study's author says that $2 trillion drop is not actually his conclusion. He said that's based on assumptions made by Senator Sanders. In fact, he wrote, quote, "It is likely that the actual cost of Medicare for All would be substantially greater than these estimates, which assume significant administrative and drug cost savings under the plan, and also assume that healthcare providers operating under Medicare for All will be reimbursed at rates more than 40% lower than those currently paid by private health insurance."
So there, it's mentioned so quickly that you could miss it. It doesn't really matter if Bernie Sanders comes out and points his finger at the nurses union now or later. If he were actually elected into power, he would then be put in the position the same as a right-wing union buster of saying, no, I don't care what salaries your union negotiated, union for doctors, union for nurses, union for hospital workers. The Bernie Sanders administration, the federal government, is going to force your wages to be lower, and dramatically lower, maybe 40%, maybe it would come down to the same rates you see in those other countries like France and so on. So if we compare the two, the difference between a primary care doctor and a specialist in France is almost a rounding error, right? Look at that. They're almost the same in France. But then look at the United States of America. You're already paying an unbelievable amount for primary care, and then it gets much more unbelievable when we switch into specialists. Here's another admission of the fundamental underlying tension here in a Reuters article. Americans use roughly the same amount of health services as people in other affluent nations, the study found. Instead, health spending may be higher in the U.S. because prices are steeper for drugs, medical devices, physician and nurse salaries, and administrative costs to process medical claims. Which one of those do you think, when you do the math, is the largest part of the cost of delivering healthcare in the United States of America? Obviously, healthcare is what you'd call a labor-intensive industry. These are unbelievable wages to be paying. And yes, the, shall we say, class struggle that's going on here, in reality, below the surface, invisible, nowhere really admitted to by Bernie Sanders, nor by the mainstream media reporting this, is that medical doctors themselves, not some abstract, depersonalized it, not some corporate conspiracy, not corporate greed. Medical doctors themselves are a powerful lobby who have something to win and something to lose in this debate. And they are playing to win. And the left wing is hampering itself by failing to admit, honestly and openly, that the enemies of Medicare for All in the United States are the medical doctors themselves.
Dun, 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 dun.